All right. Hello and welcome to all our attendees joining us today for the EDI Implementation Lifecycle Skills Kickstart. I'm here with Nick Bedecker. We'll get started in just a minute. I want to give the other attendees 30 seconds or a minute to arrive, and then we'll get going. For all of those attendees who are just arriving, be sure to drop in your questions or comments into the webinar chat or Q&A. We'll be monitoring that throughout the session. Love to have that live audience participation. Anything that you want to drop in about the EDI implementation lifecycle process for you, questions about it moving forward, points that you'd like to make on your team's behalf, just go ahead and drop them right in there. Like I said, we'll be watching them. We are 1 minute past the hour, so I think it's fair to go ahead and get started. I think we're probably going to see a few more people trickle in, but I'm calling a quorum on this. So hello again and welcome everybody to this session on the EDI implementation lifecycle. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nick.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. Welcome, everyone, as Lori mentioned, to Encompass Technologies Skills Kickstart series. Today's agenda, we will be reviewing the EDI implementation lifecycle. So we'll be looking at an EDI setup from start to finish, what that project looks like within Encompass, and how much our customers participate in that process. As Lori mentioned, my name is Nick Bedecker. I'm the EDI manager here at Encompass Technologies. Been with the company now for about 4.5 years, and I'm really looking forward to showing you guys what it takes to get an EDI implementation into production today. Here is our agenda for today's Skills Kickstart. First, we'll do a brief overview of the what and why of EDI. Give everyone a baseline understanding of EDI, make sure we're all on the same page there. Then for the majority of today's Skills Kickstart, we'll be doing a deep dive into the 5 phases of the EDI implementation lifecycle. Finally, we'll finish up with post-production support. So what does it look like after that implementation is put into production and what you can expect afterwards? So what is EDI? Put simply, EDI is the computer-to-computer exchange of essential business documents. These documents can range in the form of invoicing documents, such as the 850 purchase order. They can also be different types of invoicing documents, such as the 810 post-delivery invoice. So after you deliver product, you'll send that to a retailer or supplier, and that is essentially a receipt. This is what you owe us. There are many different types of business documents. 820 remittances, 832 product catalogs, pricing catalogs. But in essence, EDI is that computer-to-computer exchange of business documents, between retailers and suppliers, with distributors, wholesalers sitting in the middle there. So let's do a quick overview of those 5 phases of the implementation lifecycle. First phase, initiation and discovery. So it's that project kickstart there. This is where the fun begins, right? And in this phase, we're defining the who and the what of an EDI implementation. Next phase, we'll be looking to complete map development. So this is translating data from one computer and being able to import it into another computer and extract the data we need from those documents. So every different type of business, they might be running different types of software, and those different software, they need to communicate with each other and exchange business data. And that's what a map translation does. It translates data from one software, translates it into the language that another software can speak, and then therefore we can exchange and translate the data that we need. Phase 3, so after we have developed a map translation, we know these 2 pieces of software can communicate with each other. Next, we need to configure the data set that's going to be sent back and forth between what we call trading partners. So that will be compiling and organizing that required data from the Encompass customer site, making sure that when we send and transmit that data with our trading partners, that data is accepted by the trading partner, and vice versa. When they send an EDI file from a trading partner to an Encompass customer, we're able to accept that data. And that's what we do in the configuration phase. Phase 4 is the testing phase. So we've compiled all the data, we've developed the map translation, we've configured all the different elements of the EDI implementation. Now we're ready to test it. And that'll fall into two broad categories: document testing. So that's the testing of the actual data that's being traded back and forth, the files themselves, and then end-to-end testing. That is actual transmitting of data back and forth. So in any sort of EDI transaction, it's an automated process. So files are sent back and forth via an API, and that also has to be tested. We have to ensure that files can successfully be sent back and forth without issue. So we call that end-to-end testing. And then, if required, there is a third element. If there's a new feature that's developed, new functionality that's included as part of this EDI implementation, all those new features and functions will be tested as well. Finally, the production phase. So we've completed all the previous phases, we've developed the map translation, we've configured all the various tables, we've done all the testing. Now we're ready to move that implementation into production and exchange production data. Now that we have a brief overview of the 5 phases of the implementation lifecycle, let's do a deep dive into each individual one and give you guys all that information you need. Phase number 1, initiation and discovery. So this phase can take anywhere from hours to days. So in the situation where a trading partner provides all the information you need up front, when you begin that EDI implementation process, we can complete phase 1 within a few hours. On the other hand, if communication is hard to come by, if we're not getting quick responses from our trading partners, this phase can take a couple days. Now, there are 4 kind of key elements of the phase number 1 here: initiation and discovery. So first off, the setup begins, the project begins. What we're looking at here is what will normally happen for an Encompass customer is you will get an email from either a retailer or supplier. That's generally how an EDI implementation is initiated. You, as an Encompass customer, will get an email from Target, from Amazon, from Constellation, from Boston Beer, and they'll say, like, we would like to set up EDI. It's a requirement in order to do business with us, and that's essentially the start of that process. Generally, in most situations, it is supplier or retailer initiated, meaning as the Encompass customer, you will be the one receiving that request from the retailer or supplier, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Let's say, for example, you notice you have a retailer or supplier that you're doing a lot of business with, and a lot of your process is manual, be it manually keying in purchases or invoices, manually applying payments. And you realize you don't have any sort of EDI integration with that trading partner, you can reach out to them and ask them if they are EDI capable and would like to set up EDI. So while in most situations, the Encompass customer will be the one to receive that request from the supplier or retailer, it doesn't always have to be that way. You are empowered to identify those gaps in EDI setups, and then reaching out to those retailers or suppliers and requesting an EDI setup. And really in this beginning stage here, we decide whether we're going to move forward with this implementation or not. The vast majority of setups, implementations, and we use that term interchangeably, a setup and an implementation. In the majority of situations, the setup will proceed and be put into production eventually. But there are situations where either the retailer is not within their IT budget. We see that quite often where, hey, quarter 1, we've maxed out the amount of new vendors we're going to be adding on for EDI integration, so we'll have to wait till next quarter. Or there's some sort of business situation where they're just not accepting any new EDI partnerships. But in the majority of situations, as I mentioned, this implementation will proceed. But in this beginning stage is when we kind of identify, okay, are we actually going to see this project through to the end? Once you've kind of confirmed, okay, we know who the trading partner is, we have to go through that EDI discovery process. So we're confirming a couple of key elements here. One, we're confirming the scope of this project, right? What is it exactly that we're setting up, we're implementing, right? We need to know the file types, right? Are we setting up just 850 purchase orders? Is there going to be a sequence of files that we're setting up? For example, Rite Aid sends you an 850 purchase order. You deliver that invoice to the customer, and then you send them back an 810 post delivery, right? So we call that a sequence where there's multiple files traded back and forth as part of that business relationship. So we want to know that up front, right? What's everything we needed complete for this project up front? Next is requirements gathering. So once we know what are all the different elements that are part of this implementation, we need to know the specifics of those different elements. For example, a big part of this process is confirming the IDs of each party. So when we're sending files back and forth with a trading partner, each entity will have its own identifier, right? We have a sender ID and a receiver ID. That way, both systems know when files are received, who these files belong to. So those are one of the key elements we want to confirm up front. Another one is vendor number, right? As a Encompass customer, you'll almost always be assigned a vendor number by a retailer or a supplier. And again, that's how we identify your business. And so those types of information we all want to get up front. And the reason we do this is so that when we're in the next phases of this project, we don't have to come back and take some step backs and gather this information that we should have gotten up front. And it just allows us to complete a setup much sooner than if we had to kind of go back and forth and pick apart and get these individual pieces instead of just getting it all up front. And then finally, if it's a new EDI trading partnership, right? Encompass has never worked with this retailer or supplier before. There are no map translations. Then as part of the EDI discovery process, we will gather those technical specifications from the trading partner. So every trading partner has a different technical spec for each one of their files that basically just defines how their system can accept those types of files. So we need to get those technical specs so when we develop our own map translation, we know how their computer system will accept those files. Finally, once as the Encompass customer, once you have, and with the assistance of Encompass, gathered all of the elements we need to complete this setup. So you've confirmed the scope, we've confirmed the requirements, we've gathered any EDI technical specifications. Now you're ready to loop in Encompass to assist with the implementation process. From your Encompass customer portal in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a link to submit an EDI implementation service request. And you'll see the form that you fill out, those fields that you fill out are the exact requirements we need to complete that setup. If you need any assistance filling out that form, please submit a Zendesk support ticket and a member of the Encompass EDI team would be happy to assist you in filling out that form. Once that form has been submitted, an Encompass task is created. So I like to make sure I'm very clear that it's not a Zendesk ticket, but an Encompass task in our old task system that the professional services team still utilizes. And we track that project within that task. So the task is automatically generated. It provided all of the elements from that form that you submitted. And then as we complete the implementation project, all the project updates will be found in that task. And the final element really of phase one is going through that review gate process where we review the form that was submitted, we review the task that was submitted, and if we identify any gaps in the requirement, we will then assign that to an EDI analyst, and that analyst will follow up with you to complete any remaining elements of phase one before we move to phase two. Before, though, we move to phase two, let's take a quick moment to discuss the cost of an EDI implementation. This is a common question we get on the Encompass EDI team here. Great news, we don't charge for an EDI setup. So that is the through line here is there is no cost itself to an EDI setup. There's no additional fees there. The only place in which you accrue an EDI bill is through document processing. So the importing and exporting of EDI files. You can access your EDI billing dashboard by just typing in EDI billing in your universal search bar. Or if you're within the EDI home dashboard, you can see that in the top left corner, you can then navigate to the EDI billing dashboard. And what you see here is a snapshot of the billing dashboard. So on the left-hand side, we have a list of every single EDI file that was traded over a quarter. So we bill on a quarterly basis. You can see it's broken up based on our tiered pricing model that you see on the right-hand side. So direct EDI documents, there's a charge there. For pricing files like those 832, 879, those tend to be some of the largest EDI files that are traded. So those are, $1 each. You have fintech prices and so on and so forth. So if you're ever curious about EDI billing, the biggest thing you need to know is we don't charge for any setups or implementation. And again, we only charge for the actual document processing when files are traded back and forth, and you can review that at your EDI billing dashboard. And you can see what your current bill is for this quarter, and then you have a filter to navigate back and see last quarter's bill as well. All right, moving on back into our implementation lifecycle. So let's jump over to phase 2, map development. So this phase can take about 3 to 5 days. I put a little asterisk under the 5 there because if it's a new trading partnership and new functionality is required. So we're seeing this quite a bit on the supplier side, right? We have a ton of retailer integrations already. We've built out a very large feature set for retailer EDI. On the supplier side, though, we don't have as much integrations on the supplier side. So as we bring in more and more suppliers into our EDI partnership, there's new functionality that was required. So if there is a new feature that we have to request, that can extend the time in which a map will be developed. In terms of understanding, is this a new trading partnership, right? As the Encompass customer, you may get an email and you don't know, right, off the top, are we currently working with this retailer or supplier, or is this a new partnership? How can you know that? What you can do is you can navigate to your Exchange map table, and under the Exchange map alias, under that column, you can search any retailer or supplier. And if you find Exchange maps, that means we currently have an integration with them. If not, then this is a new partnership and we'll have to develop new maps. So just keep in mind, if it's a new partnership, that will extend the time it takes to complete an EDI implementation. This is also the part in phase 2 where we review those technical specifications that are provided in phase 1. Again, calling back to the importance of why phase 1 is so important. We get all those technical specs up front. That way, when we're in the map development phase, we don't have to pause development to contact the trading partner to get these documents. We have them up front, and we can begin development right away. Once we've reviewed the technical specifications, we've confirmed, yes, this is a new partnership. We will then assign that project task to an EDI Encompass developer. And we will go through the map development phase. We'll develop the map per spec provided by the trading partner. We will review our XML. That's basically the way in which we convert data from the file that the trading partner provides, and we convert it into the language that our system understands, and we can extract out that data that we need. So if we do an XML review, we determine, hey, the data that's required for this implementation, we currently have no way to reference it or access that data. New functionality will be required. Again, extending that development time. And then once we reach the end of phase 1 or phase 2 is when we've completed the first iteration of that Exchange map. So we've confirmed all of the required functionality is present, and we are confident that we can begin testing once we've developed that first iteration of the Exchange map. Now we're ready for phase 3, the configuration phase. So the configuration phase is one of the phases where an Encompass customer can help out and participate quite a bit. This phase really only takes about 4 to 8 hours. Again, as long as we have all of those details from phase 1 up front, this is one of the quicker phases that we can complete. So, Exchange configurations. These records are required for every single EDI setup. So just know that you always have to create an Exchange configuration whenever you're setting up EDI. Again, you can navigate to your Exchange configurations table. We'll take a look at an example here soon. But for every setup, we need to create the Exchange configuration as well as the mailbox. So the mailbox is that transmission, that network that we use to send files back and forth with our trading partner. So we need to create those two things in order to successfully trade those EDI files. Now, on top of Exchange configurations, you have various other data sets and data points that we have to account for and make sure are accurate and can be referenced as part of the configuration phase. So stuff like vendor numbers, right? Uh, Again, all the stuff we collected in phase one. Various forms of identifiers. So the Encompass customer as a trading partner, you'll have your own identifier, right? The EDI file itself will have an, what's called an ISA ID or a, wholesaler ID, distributor ID. Um, but also all of your customers on your customers table will have their own identifiers as well, right? Those identifiers are assigned by the retailers, right? A commonly known one is Walmart, right? For every single one of Walmart's individual retail locations, they use a 13-digit global location number, a GLN, right? So if you're going to be trading EDI files with Walmart, every single one of your Walmart customers needs to have a GLN, and that GLN value has to be accurate and has to tie to that customer, right? So this is all those elements that we're collecting in phase one. We're now taking those pieces and we're plugging them into various fields on your site. So that way, when we trade those EDI files, that data is accurate and it's present. There are many other different types of critical EDI data that has to be accounted for as well, depending on the type of EDI file. For example, an 856 ASN, an advanced shipment notice, we need to have the pallet tag template, right? You need to understand how to use ASN pallet tags within the delivery optimizer. Stuff like EDI pricing files, product catalogs, 832, right? There's a whole separate table called price posting templates where you have to set up that template and reference the customers that utilize that pricing data. So this configuration phase, there are many, many different tables, many records that we have to set up in order to successfully trade those EDI files. There are other related tables as well. I mentioned the price posting templates. Two of the more commonly known ones and used ones in the majority of EDI setups are product authorizations and split invoicing. So then again, we'll look at examples of both of these here shortly. But as I mentioned, most implementations will require one or both product authorizations or split invoicing. Not every one, but majority. And we do prefer that the Encompass customer be the one to create these records, right? We want to empower you guys to understand this process. And that way, in future setups, right, you can get this created ahead of time. Again, saving time and allowing us to complete an EDI implementation sooner than if we had to manually create these. And also, if there's any issues down the road, you have a better understanding of how to troubleshoot an issue as it relates to a split invoice record or a product authorization record. Once we've gone through the configuration phase, again, creating exchange configurations, mailboxes, making sure the exchange map is completed, getting all those various data elements, vendor numbers, identifiers, all the related tables. Once all those things are created and we've checked and validated, yep, this is all created, all this data looks good, we will then follow up with the customer and, in this case, the trading partner and the Encompass customer to confirm, hey, we're ready to move into the testing phase. We also follow up, as I mentioned, with the trading partner to say like, hey, we're ready to go, and then we're ready to move into the next phase, test phase. But before we get there, let's look at a few examples of some table records as it relates to the configuration phase. All right. First, let's take a look at some exchange configurations. So here we have two fintech exchange configurations. You have an outbound configuration and an inbound configuration. And reading it from left to right, you can see it contains some really critical elements we need for an EDI setup. On the left-hand side, we have the exchange map, right? So you know right away by looking at this that this is a fintech implementation. You also know that that first setup, that first record there is an 810, right? So these are post-delivery files that we're sending. We know it's in production, right? That second column there, production true, right? So we know these are actively trading production files. We can see the last send date, really just to let you know, like, hey, even though this is in production, maybe it's been a week since it sent a file, and perhaps that's alarming, right? Like, hey, this really, we should be sending invoices to FinTech every day. Why has it been a week since we've sent one? Maybe that'll tell you there's an issue here. We have the mailbox, right? In this case, I used, this is a test environment, so we use test mailboxes. But if this was a actual live FinTech setup, you would see these FinTech specific mailboxes there. We also have the direction, right? You want to know which way these files are going. An outbound file, right? It originates with the Encompass customer. So the data that we populate that file with is all referenced from within the Encompass customer site. Then we have identifiers, right? Again, this is all information we collect up front as part of phase one to know, who's the receiver of this file. So in this case, the outbound one, that first record, that receiver ID, that value that starts with 616, that's fintech's ID, right? If you're on any site in Encompass, doesn't matter which customer you are, that is fintech's ID. They'll always use the same ID, right? And you can always access your trading partner IDs as well. If you're ever curious, right? Let's say you're going through the beginning phases of a implementation and you get asked the question, hey, what is Wegmans ISA ID? Right? Or what is Safeway's ISA ID? And as the Encompass customer, like, I have no idea. Why would I ever know that? Right? Well, good news. We store that information on your site. So you can go to trading partner alias. Again, that's trading partner alias. You can look up any retailer or supplier, and we will list out those IDs that are tied to that trading partner. If you don't find the retailer, let us know, or supplier, we'll add those records. But just know you can access that at any point, again, under trading partner alias. And then on the bottom record is the inbound version, right? So you see we flipped the receiver ID, the sender ID, right? And that bottom record, since it's inbound, the sender then becomes fintech, the receiver becomes the Encompass customer. And then again, this is a file that's coming into your system as opposed to a file that's exporting out of your site. Next, let's look at a product authorization record. Product authorizations are really, really powerful tools you can use to modify product data specific to a trading partner, right? So I have here two different product authorization records. The first one is for 7-Eleven, right? And it's for that Miller Lite that Miller Lite product. And you can see there on the third column, we have the chain product number value. So what that product authorization record is telling the system is that when you send an EDI file to 7-Eleven, let's say it's an 810 post-delivery file, and that file contains that product, instead of sending that product's carrier UPC value or unit UPC value, instead send the chain product number value. Or in this case, they actually have two values, right? They have not only the chain product number value, but they also have a UPC override. So we're telling the system, hey, send these two values instead of the standard, UPC value that's tied to that product. You can say the same. You can see the same thing for that Love's Red Bull product at the bottom, right? Now, why does this become important? Because many retailers, you can see two of them here. Another big one is Costco. Another big one is Trader Joe's. Is that their system that they use does not recognize universal product codes, right? UPCs, those carrier UPCs. So instead, what they do is in their system, they assign products a different value, right? Either a chain product number value or a UPC value. And they say, like, hey, when you exchange EDI data with us, don't use the product standard UPC, use this other value instead. So by creating this product authorization record, you're telling the system, hey, just for 7-Eleven and just for this one product, modify that product's identifier when you send to 7-Eleven, right? So it will not interfere with Walmart data. It's just specific to that chain. Another really great feature of product authorizations is the ability to modify unit of measure, right? Let's say, for example, you have a retailer that says, hey, we only ever buy in eaches. Even though this product you normally sell at a case at a time, we don't actually sell at a case. We don't purchase it as a case. We purchase it as eaches, right? Instead of one case of 12-liter bottles, it's like we're going to buy 12 eaches instead. So using product authorization, you can convert the unit of measure from cases to eaches for each individual supplier or each individual retailer, I should say. Again, giving you that really great granular ability to modify product data as you need to per trading partner. One more thing we'll look at here under the configuration table examples are split invoices. So this is a really big common one as well, right? You see this a lot with any retailer that is sending data to fintech, right? Let's say, for example, you have a retailer that says, hey, for any alcohol invoice, I'll pay that through fintech. But if it's a non-alcohol invoice, I don't pay those through fintech. You have to send those directly to me, and I'll pay those, based on some term that's determined, right? Split invoicing is how we achieve that functionality, right? You can see here we have these two 7-Eleven records. Let's say in my previous example, you wanted to send 7-Eleven beer to fintech and then 7-Eleven, soda, Red Bull directly to 7-Eleven. The only thing you'd have to change in that record there is update the term from GXS beer to fintech to a fintech term. Now what you're telling the system is for beer invoices, send it to fintech. For everything else, send it directly to 7-Eleven. And that's what split invoicing really is there for. Also great if you have different vendor numbers, right? Let's say 7-Eleven here in this example assigns you a alcohol vendor number and an NA vendor number. Split invoicing is there to make sure you can split out those invoices and apply different vendor numbers based on the product type. You can also split credits, right? There are retailers that say like, hey, if there's a credit on an invoice, we want you to break that out into its own invoice so that you have just debits on one invoice and credits on another. And again, you can see that kind of right there in the middle of your screen. You can split credits. We do suggest when creating a split invoice record to create them at the chain level, as you can see here, right? So let's say you have 50 7-Eleven customers, right? Instead of creating two split invoice records for each one of those, for each one of those 70 or 50 customers, right? So 100 records total. Rather than doing that, you can instead create just two records, these two chain level 7-Eleven records, and those records will apply to all of your 7-Eleven customers under that chain, right? So it's about managing as few records as possible. There are situations in which you do have to create customer level split invoice records. We understand that. But in any, whenever possible, we always suggest create those split invoice records at the chain level. Again, we're minimizing the amount of work you have to do.
Now, before we move on, we actually
Yes,
have a couple of questions come through the chat.
great.
The first one is referring back to product authorizations. We were talking about UPCs. The question is, will the UPC override affect the paper invoice, or will the UPC override only affect the EDI files?
That's a great question. My understanding is it's just the EDI file itself. I can get back to you on that. Whoever asked that question, I could follow up with you on that one. My understanding, it does apply just to the EDI file itself. But thinking through this, I could see a situation where you would want it to print out on the invoice as well. But in this context, this is specific related to EDI files in general.
We did have a comment from somebody saying UPC overrides do show up on scan sheets,
Oh,
which makes sense, right?
that would
Like
make sense, right?
in
Yeah.
your scenario, that is something that would make sense. We do have another question, and it is on the unit of measure, again from that product authorizations when we were talking about that. Is there a way to set the unit of measure override at the split invoice level so that you don't have to manage them? For example, all wine items come across as eaches, or where we need to dex all wine as eaches.
No. Product authorizations are really chain specific. You can't apply it to like a broad product group, let's say all wine products. It is specific to a chain. So you would have to create them. Now, the good news is, let's say, for example, you have a wine product and for, almost all of your chains, they're sent the same way, right? The same UPC override. You can copy that record and just add a new chain every time, right? And that'll kind of quickly create those records. But product authorizations are tied specifically to chains and not to product groups or product types.
All right. That's all we have in the chat for now, but keep them coming, guys. Keep
Yeah,
dropping in those questions.
excellent. Great questions, guys. Love that. All right. Let's move back into our EDI implementation lifecycle, into phase 4, testing phase. This generally is the longest phase. If it's a new integration, phase 2, the map development phase will be the longest phase. But for the majority of our setups that are, not new integrations, phase 4, the testing phase, is the longest phase, about 5 to 10 business days. We look at that really broken up into 4 elements. So the first thing we want to do is define the test guidelines. And this generally happens between Encompass EDI and the trading partner. So first we want to confirm the test schedule, right? We want to know, is there a specific time frame in which testing has to be completed? Anyone in this webinar here that's worked with SPS Commerce will know that not only do they have a specific time frame that testing has to be completed, but there is a charge, that accrues as testing continues. So you're incentivized to complete testing as quick as possible, right? So as part of, again, phase one, we want to know like, hey, do we have a really tight timeline we have to complete testing in, or is it the customer, instead of saying like, hey, it's not a big priority for us, the communication might be a little slower, so maybe testing we can expect to take a little longer than expected. We also want to understand and define the test parameters. What exactly are we testing, right? Is there a defined list of test cases that we need to complete? Is it as simple as, we just trade one file, and if it looks good, we count that as complete? Like how robust are we testing? And then again, we decided go, no go. Sometimes we have trading partners that don't need testing at all. For example, if you're an Anheuser-Busch customer and you're setting up an order bud setup, usually AB does not require testing. We've completed so many order bud setups over these years. We've kind of perfected that process so much so where AB is like, hey, we almost never have issues with testing. Let's just skip the test phase. Once you've configured everything and you're confident we're ready to go, let's just define that go live date, right? So we decide, hey, are we testing or not? Once all those parameters are set and we decide, yes, we're going to move into the test phase, we're looking to do two things, really, as I mentioned earlier, that overview of the EDI implementation lifecycle. First, we're going to be doing end-to-end testing. Now, you don't technically have to do this test first. Sometimes you want to do document testing first. But in our experience, most situations, training partners do want to complete end-to-end testing first, right? They want to confirm there's no issues sending files back and forth, because part of the next phase of testing is sending test files across that network. So we're doing end-to-end testing, right? We're testing file transmission. Can we, as the Compass customer, can we send a file to the trading partner, and can they send a file back to us? And is that file transmission expected, right? Are files being pushed to directories that we can pull from? Do we need to develop any new inbound API commands? So the inbound API command is tied to the type of EDI file that we're importing, right? You may have heard this term X12. X12 is, in the United States, the most commonly traded file format for EDI. That file requires its own API command in order to import it and process it successfully, right? The majority of inbound API commands have already been developed, right? We have an command for X12 files, for order bud files, for Miller UFF, Coca-Cola, the list goes on. But any new integration, anytime we work with a new trading partner that has their own unique file format, we have to develop a new inbound API command. So that's part of this testing phase, is determining, whether we do need to develop a new API command or not. Once we've completed end-to-end testing, we can then move on to document testing. And again, this is interchangeable. Sometimes you do document testing first and then end-to-end testing, or you do both in parallel. You kind of complete both tests at the same time. But document testing generally does take the longest because we're testing every element of a file, right? We're testing not just the format of the file, right? Is every position within the file exactly the way we expect, right? Is the ISA ID in the header area? Is product data in the item level of the file? Is SAC charges at the, the summary level of a file, so on and so forth, right? So we're testing the file format itself. We're also testing the data within the file. So not only is the vendor number field present within the file and it's in the correct position, but is the vendor number value itself correct, right? Are the product IDs correct? Is the DUNS number, in the file, so on and so forth. So we're testing the file format and the data within the file itself. Any failures, right? Anytime we test a file, it does not pass validation. Sometimes that's either on the Encompass end, and we need to make a map correction, or it's on the trading partner's end, and they need to do the same on their end, right? And we go through multiple iterations as we trade a file back and forth. It's either pass or failed. If it's failed, we're given that kind of error log to say like, hey, it failed for X, Y, and Z reason. Please correct and transmit a new test file. And then we do the same on our end, right? If we receive an 850 purchase order from a customer, we will import that into your site on a test site, and make sure invoices can generate, products are present on the invoice, it's assigned to the correct route, correct load sheet, so on and so forth, right? So we do that thorough testing, both inbound and outbound with the trading partner. Finally, once both trading partners, so the Encompass customer and the retailer supplier, have agreed testing has been completed, we've done end-to-end testing successfully, we've completed document testing successfully, we then can say testing is done, and we're ready to move on to the fifth and final phase of the implementation lifecycle. Production. So this is about a week-long process. Usually when a trading partner has said, hey, testing is completed, we will define the go live date. So we'll go through a pre-production phase, I guess a mini phase within this one, where we will make sure we're ready to go, right? We will define that go live date. Sometimes trading partners say, hey, as soon as testing is done, let's not waste any time, just put these into production right away, right? The next business day. Other times there are agreements that have to be signed. There are products that have to be configured. There could be many reasons why a implementation, even though it's ready to go, won't be put into production right away. And instead, a future date will be picked, will be decided to say, hey, on this date and time, let's move these into production, right? So that's all confirmed with the trading partner. Then we go through the pre-production checklist, and that's usually an internal checklist that we handle. Sometimes we have the customer, you guys, participate in this process, but generally this is an internal process. So what we're doing really is we're going over phases 2, 3, and 4, right? We're checking those exchange configurations. We're checking all that customer product data, right? Our chain store numbers there, our GLNs there. We're checking the product data. Does the product have UPCs? Does it have required split invoice records, product authorization records, so on and so forth, right? Just doing that pre-production checklist to know that when we put this in production, we won't be faced with any issues. Once we feel confident that this implementation is ready for production, and we've confirmed that go live date with the customer, we're ready to put this into production, the most exciting part of this project here. So we move all those exchange configurations into production, again, setting those to active equals true. And then for a week after go live, so let's say, for example, you went live on Monday, for that entire week, then either the developer that worked on that implementation or an analyst on the team here will be monitoring those EDI transactions to make sure, our 810, 856 files, are they successfully exporting to the customer as we expect? Is the trading partner receiving those files and accepting them? Same thing for inbound, right? If you're expecting 850 purchase orders and you're like, hey, I got this email from Total Wine. They said they were going to send us an 850 file. We haven't received it yet. These are really big orders. Can you help us track this down, right? We would identify those things right away in that week-long kind of post-production phase. We're monitoring that data traffic. We're addressing those showstoppers right away. So any of those exchange tasks that are in error status, that's that red error status, that means there's something critically wrong with the EDI file that has to be addressed and reprocessed. So we look at those errors right away. We address those right away. Any exchange task that's in warning status, so that means that we were able to process the file, but there's some elements of it that we couldn't compute, we couldn't process. That's oftentimes seen, for example, with an 850 purchase order, if we can't find a specific product, right? Let's say Costco orders a product, uses a chain product number, but that product's product authorization record hasn't been created, right? Those sorts of things we will identify and then follow up with the customer to say like, hey, just be aware of this 850. It did generate an invoice, but there are some products we couldn't find. And if you read the memo, you will understand kind of why we weren't able to find those. Once we followed up with the customer and we've done kind of one final check-in to say like, hey, how everything's going, we've been monitoring the traffic. Everything looks good so far. Are you satisfied? Are you happy? Are you feel good about this project? And they give us that sign off. They say, yes, everything looks good. Project's complete. And we've made it to the finish line. Our average EDI implementation project duration is about 5 to 20 business days. So on that short end of that spectrum, 5 days, these are trading partners that we've already integrated in the past, right? So we don't need to develop new exchange maps. We're very familiar with their testing process, and we're able to get all the 5 phases done within just, essentially 1 week, sometimes even sooner, right? There are ones like the Provi implementations, fintech implementations that Encompass will actually complete all of our work within 1 to 2 business days. And then we're working with fintech to confirm that go live date. So there are situations where it's even sooner than 5 days. Sometimes though, it does last, 15 to 20 days. And again, those are for any new trading partnerships. We're developing new exchange maps, and maybe there's feature requests and new functionality that we have to code and develop as well. So we're looking at about 5 to 20 business days. Now that we've completed the 5 phases of the EDI implementation lifecycle, your EDI setup is in production let's say, for example, 6 months down the road, all of a sudden there's issues, right? You're not getting a purchase order you're expecting, or this Walmart 856 file has suddenly started to error out, and now Walmart's rejecting our deliveries, right? Those are big issues. And it could be even a minor issue, right? What do you do at that point? Let's talk about post-production support. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have, that go live support feature where, generally about 1 week, 2 weeks if it's required, but, on average it's about 1 week where we give you that production support as just part of that project, right? That kind of end of the project support to make sure that, everything is working the way we expect it to work, right? We do that follow up with the Encompass customer. The Encompass customer signs off on that project being completed, right? Post production, later on down the road, as I mentioned, let's say there's issues that need to be addressed. You then at that point would then submit a Zendesk support ticket. So you navigate to your Encompass customer portal, and then you'd submit a support ticket there. Our EDI support response time is a day or less. Pretty consistently now, we are completely zeroing out our EDI support queue. So you will see a response on your EDI ticket very quickly. And if an exchange map is required, an exchange map correction is required, I should say, we do need that communication directly from the trading partner. So one way in which you as the Encompass customer can help out Encompass EDI, specifically when it comes to support, is when you do contact us, provide that communication from the trading partner upfront or loop us into that email thread. Because anytime an exchange map correction is required, we need to communicate directly with the trading partner, right? We need to know from them exactly what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, right? And there's a really good reason for this, right? Every single time that we have developed a map translation, let's say it's a 7-Eleven 850 purchase order map translation, that map is developed specific to their technical specs, right? So it's their, you can think of it as their like proprietary information, right? So we are not going to modify a map translation unless it's specifically requested by that trading partner, right? Maybe a situation in which you think a map translation or a map correction is required, but really it's a different data element that we can fix. But just know that when you're contacting Encompass EDI support, if you can give us that communication that the trading partner has provided you, if you can give us to upfront, we can fix that problem even sooner. Because in almost every situation, what we'll ask you is, have you spoken to the trading partner? Have you received an email from Walmart or Target? If you have, can we see that email or can you loop us in? Right? All that stuff will just add time it takes to complete an EDI setup, EDI support ticket. So by giving us that information up front, again, it just gives us the ability to help you out much faster and get you a resolution to your issue much, much sooner. Okay. That is the end of our webinar. Thank you, everyone. I hope we have some more questions I can answer.
We don't have any more questions in
Oh,
the chat just yet, but go ahead and get them in there. I've got some like closeout spiel that I can do kind of slowly while you're typing them in. I want to start off by thanking you, Nick, for giving this presentation today to all of us. The way I think of these implementations is a little bit like, soccer or rugby. Our ability to run the ball down the field depends on the quality of information provided, how much passing back and forth we need to do. We can run these plays and we know how to run them. It's just sort of dependent on these other factors, how much we need to pass the ball. So thank you for this session, really informative. Thank you to all of our attendees for coming today. We hope it was helpful for you as well. We look forward to doing some more EDI implementations, coming up, and always looking to learn new things and get new partners for this. So still no questions coming through. I'm gonna do the slow roll into closeout. You can find this session and anything else on our recording archive. So look for that, on the portal, the e-learning page. Being able to access this, we'll also post it in help resources. We are going to post a survey at the end of the session. So if you can take a second and fill it out. We are always looking for more information on what kind of topics you'd like to see, and particularly around EDI. So if there's, something special or particular you'd like to know about, we are definitely interested. So be on the lookout for more sessions on EDI coming up, things like troubleshooting EDI or, some hands-on type practice. just as a sneak peek down into what you may be able to expect. But yeah, thanks again, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining me.
Bye.
We'll talk soon. Bye.